Lovely to see you all here. I'm Ian Trow from SMPTE.
And I'm Ciarán Doran, representing the Royal Television Society, RTS Technology Centre.
Lovely to see so many people here. Whilst we've got a formal structure, we've got cameras, it's streamed and everything like that, I want to answer your questions. And I think plenty of you know that when I prepare a presentation, I love it if I never get to the end of my presentation and you ask questions. Only ground rules for it is if you've got a question, put your hand up, wait for the mic to come, and we'll answer it so that the people who are watching us streamed can get the full gist of your question. I'd like to thank, well, I'll do the thank you for M2A Media, shall I?
Go ahead.
M2A and InSync for sponsoring it and for all of the food. And I mean, what a fabulous venue, you know, to be here at IMG. You know, so I think even before we've done anything useful, let's give IMG a round of applause for all of the logistics on this. Now, usually when we start these things, our esteemed SMPTE President John gets up and he goes through a number of slides. First of all, we'll thank IMG, as we usually do. We talk about who SMPTE are, but this is dangerous territory because who are we trying to recruit? RTS members, but this is the first of a number of joint events. So, I mean, I put the slides in there just for completeness. You know, I hope that the two organisations work closer together and, you know, certainly intend on doing other things if it goes well tonight, sir. Okay? So you can read it down there. I'm sure you know a lot about SMPTE. I'm sure you know about our membership details and so forth. You know that what gist we've got in terms of the kind of presentations. I do a lot of the cloud practitioner presentations, and I think the next one that I'll be doing is mid-March 2026, so something to look forward to. There'll be more seats available to it, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to do it as a joint event with RTS, and any spillover topics that emerge from this one will go into there, but we'll talk more about that. So you want to say some words, don't you?
Yeah, I wanted to say why we're here, or talk about why we're here. Ian and I met at the SMPTE North, not the RTS North. RTS doesn't have a North in the Technology Centre. RTS Technology Centre grew out of the old Thames Valley RTS chapter, and the Technology Centre now represents the technology community for all of the Royal Television Society community throughout the United Kingdom. Ian and I met at the SMPTE North event, which was, what, 3rd of September?
It was.
And it was based, it was carried out like this at the DAZN Studios facilities in Leeds. And we thought, what a great presentation the gentlemen and the people there put on to talk about the Club World Cup, which was the first streaming event that went global that was fully handed to a streamer rather than a broadcaster. We were at the heart of that, as were many people at the heart. I have to say, this evening, I don't know about you, but I'm looking around the room, I'm feeling a little bit humbled here because I'm amongst not only great names and people in our industry, but people who are way further at the cutting edge, the right at the front edge of the sports business and the live business. So it's really nice to see everybody here this evening. But at the DAZN facility, we went through that SMPTE evening and we talked a lot about the different challenges that were encountered throughout the whole of the Club World Cup and the preparation for it, which we only found out about in the middle of January. And Andy Wilson, my colleague here, will talk a little bit about that later, I'm sure. And the panellists, you're probably going to introduce the panellists in a moment. And Carolina, you've been at the forefront of the sports world for quite a long time. So we've got some good names here to bring that to the fore. So that's why we thought, let's bring this a little further south and let's do a joint venture together. We've been wanting to from the RTS for a little while. So let's carry on to 2026 and do some more together.
Excellent, excellent. So in terms of this evening, I'll do a little bit setting the scene, but the main event here is James from InSync. And I've been careful not to trespass on the areas that he's got. He's got a great presentation there. So I'll keep it fairly high level in terms of setting the scene about sports streaming. We'll then go straight into James' presentation, Conversion for the Cloud. We're not going to annihilate you with PowerPoint, so there'll be a break at 7:30, and then it'll be straight into our main man here talking about the Club World Cup. We'll then go into a panel session, ladies first. Carolina will be on the panel, as will Andy. And Ciarán, you'll have a guest presenter for the really difficult questions, won't you? And we'll have James in as well. The panel session, I've got questions prepared. I mean, you all know what I do. But I'd be more than happy if 50% of the questions came from you. And I hope that the material that we go through prompts questions. Main rule, put your hand up, wait till the mic comes, and just announce yourself. And that reminds me, the one thing, even though we're streaming, for some people, this can be awkward doing this, especially with a topic like this, where you could be viewed that we are looking at the cloud from a particular scrutiny and saying what works and what doesn't work. I make this thing about Chatham House rules apply. It's mainly for journalists and things like that, where people are representing broadcasters or affiliations. I want there to be an open conversation here, and the Chatham House rules means just don't make associations of speakers to organisations. It allows us to talk openly and freely, and it would be a real shame for somebody to get fired for telling the truth this close to Christmas. We'll have some final thoughts. There'll be networking at 9 o'clock, a chance to meet and ask any questions that you were too embarrassed to ask us live on the floor. So without further ado, you know that I've done quite a lot of in terms of sports streaming in the cloud. Beyond just the elaborate maze of cloud engagement models, you know, sort of hybrid, public, private cloud, a multitude of cloud offerings that require expertise in themselves. But you add to the mix things like content ingest, compression, media encapsulation, automation and orchestration, PTP timing, switching, virtualization, NMOS, software-defined networks, TAMs, which we went extensively through, and two new ones that I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert at, and I've got to do my homework before we meet at Google in March, DMF and MXL. I think what you see is that one of the things is that it's one thing to actually consider going to the cloud, which is a difficult enough decision in itself when you're considering, do you go cloud, virtualized on-prem, you know, what are the technical and commercial aspects to that? But there are a multitude of technologies that actually come along with that need considering. And it's no surprise that people are actually considering just purchasing at a service level, because this is quite a complicated landscape to actually navigate. So a few thoughts on that. Streaming workflows are really complex. One of my favourite bugbears, and I've got a couple of my members of staff here, they're frequently based on recreations of linear workflows in the cloud. You know, that's just a fact of what's going on at the moment. Media streaming is the most demanding application on a shared network. So if it is going to be the most difficult thing to entertain. It's reliant upon ubiquitous player and browser applications. Doesn't recognise lip sync and timestamps when you're talking about streaming it to an iPad. There are various levels of support, and also various levels of things like network and video buffers. The whole approach to buffering on a player is completely different from a set-top box. Poses unique, challenging monitoring needs that are very, very difficult to diagnose. You're going across different demarcation zones where it's not always the person who's actually commissioning the service who's actually got control of the peer-to-peer hopping that you're doing, or any of the region switching that you could be doing across cloud networks. It's about real-time ingest and egress, which is very much at odds with preferred cloud hosting scenarios. They like stuff that's up in the cloud that needs a lot of processing, and the ingest and egress is a problem. And the last point was I'm banging on about streaming workflows being complex, is the cloud is a term that means different things to different people. Now, I'm not going to be mean and pick on anyone and say, what do you understand about the cloud? But it does mean different things. And if you're misinterpreting what the cloud actually is, you know, it's not a good start. And I mean, frequently people get very, very confused about what's on-prem, what's virtualized, what's bare metal, you know, and you put it all together and it's quite a complex landscape. So let's have a look. Oh, I think somebody switched to a slate. There we go. What I'll do is I will go back. Just a few thoughts before I hand over to James, is that in this context, what we're talking about is it's no longer just targeting tier 1 sports. I think that a lot of people here are looking at a wide variety of events being streamed. And that means that there's a huge variation in terms of source feeds. That's really difficult to deal with. We're all used to high-value content like Formula One and Premier League being covered. But when you're talking about tier 2 feeds, where the rights have been signed and there's been little or no consideration as to the technical quality of the feed that you've got coming to you, that's a problem. Little bit controversial here. Agile approach to streaming workflow encourages feature creep. I'll let that sink in. And you can often immediately mean that your DevOps can suddenly become support engineers. And they're not very happy boys when that happens. You know, so that means, you know, you've really got a plan in this kind of environment. There is a drive to adopt remote production architectures, and the benefits of the cloud rely on a different architectural approach. And lastly, the fragmented audience is very much at odds with the available revenue, and I think that we've got to balance that up within the business if all of this investment is going to be worthwhile. But that's enough from me. I'll hand over to my esteemed colleague here.
Good evening, everybody. So thank you to Ian for inviting me to speak to you this evening. And what's more, not just to one, but to two august societies. And indeed, it's very daunting to talk to such a very wide-ranging topic that incorporates such an enormous breadth of different skill sets and different technical expertise. So I'm going to take my personal angle on it. I'm going to try and keep everyone on board as best as I possibly can. So there's doubtless going to be aspects of this that seem cryptically detailed, and then other aspects that are bread and butter to someone else, and I'm sure they can speak with a great deal more authority than I possibly can. So I am a CTO at Insync Technology, and we deliver a variety of signal processing technologies, many of them connected with conversion. And just, I think there's a few faces in the room whom I recognise. You've already, I see, had a brief sneak preview of my icebreaker. So for those who don't know me, I came to the broadcast industry and signal processing, having been the geeky kid who was the last generation to create cine films, and in fact also enjoyed being the last generation to deliver analog film projection. And I have been delivering these signal processing solutions for, shockingly, over a quarter of a century now. I think one reason for pulling up that icebreaker is that I think the thing that brings us all together is a real passionate desire to try to get the best possible images to the end viewer that we can, and that definitely motivates me on a daily basis. And indeed, what are we trying to do? We're trying to allow the viewer to participate remotely in the live experience. So something that's immersive, something that's naturalistic, something that's wholly engaging. And the difference is we're just looking at a new solution for delivering those facets of production, delivering them using cloud technologies. And unfortunately, where things go wrong, we're going to fall short on the end viewers' expectations. And that's what we're definitely seeking to do. And to me, this was the way I interpreted the core question that I've been presented with. Are we managing to get the pictures that we want to the end viewer using cloud streaming? And indeed, things do go wrong. So I don't know how many other members of the people in the room had a right thought on Monday. And I apologise profusely if, in fact, anyone here really did have a bad day at the office for this very reason. Fortunately, the AWS services I was using seemed to be present and correct. But spoiler alert, as Ian's already alluded to, there's a lot of factors that we need to account for to get this right. So just a little bit of history and context, if you'll indulge me. I was spoiled. I genuinely feel that my cohort of engineers was unbelievably lucky. Why was that? That was because joining the industry in the mid to late 90s, whilst the transition from analog to digital didn't happen overnight, it was well underway. And when I started my career, I was lucky enough pretty much to dive straight into digital signal processing. And I look back and I really did have no idea at the time just how newer technology field programmable gate arrays were. Literally, for the first time, we could affordably store a whole field of video, even if it took between 2 and 4 discrete components to do so. That we were able to use ASICs to achieve substantial fixed point multiplications. And these allowed us to actually get our teeth into delivering interesting signal processing and rather shed some of those analog headaches. And so indeed, noise, attenuation, reflections, impedance, calibration, thermal drift. There's a plethora of considerations that we no longer had to concern ourselves. We could dive into the really interesting problem. The other reason why I believe my career has been blessed is the graph on the right-hand side. Best known as Moore's Law. It's in fact a prediction, and it's proven to be one of the most astoundingly accurate and long-lasting prediction that's been made. It can be described in all manner of different ways. In this case, this is the number of transistors that we can achieve on a particular area of silicon. And we must not forget that the vertical axis is logarithmic. So over the course of my career, there has been an increase in capability of this technology of over 7 orders of magnitude. Where else in a single lifetime's experience does that kind of level of change occur? And indeed, I make mention of this because I think it is this growth in capability of generic processing and the humble microprocessor that means that we're here today talking about this topic, because it's that growth in capability that I think has facilitated us to even think about solving the problem in this way. However, I might also make mention that, in fact, I think it's fair to say, aspects of systems design over my career have actually got harder. Very much proverbial boiling the frog. This has happened quite slowly and incrementally. So bandwidth, there's an unceasing pressure to deliver more in terms of bandwidth. And indeed, we're now pushing copper absolutely at the physical limits. And thank goodness glass came along to fill in the gap. We're also facing just untold quantities of complexity. When I started my career, there were 2 flavors of SD, SDI. That meant the box had 4 configurations, 2 of which were fairly pedestrian and 2 that were quite exciting. Well, I think most media processing technology now will support of the order of at least 50 standards without being particularly exceptional. And if you're converting between those, you've already got the potential for several thousand different states of configuration. And that's before we've even started to think about some of the more detailed modes of operation, and then the increase in permutations from different protocols, from different containers, different codecs, different codec profiles, etc., etc. So managing the level of complexity that we face is incredibly, I think it's fair to say, incredibly daunting. The final one on the right-hand side, and how did that S escape? And there we were checking every last detail in, ignoring the rogue S. It's often missed, I think, that there's been this other transition. When I started my career, it was absolutely exclusively synchronous digital processing. And those synchronous systems were a real luxury. So if I had a 27 megahertz pixel clock, what that meant was that I could achieve 27 million combinatorial results or 27 million memory accesses, period. No questions asked, no qualifications. That's what I could be absolutely assured of achieving. I'm using asynchronous here in the broadest possible terms. There are a number of different definitions. But ultimately, the port of the technology has become increasingly asynchronous. And what is the implication of this? It means that we no longer have the simplicity of straightforward predictability of exactly what we will obtain. We simply have to find ways of encompassing and working with and managing levels of variability that just didn't used to be an aspect of the problem that we were solving. So, I'm about to break every rule of good presenting. I apologise in advance that the following slides have got too many bullet points on them. Feel free to let them wash over you. And if you see points that you recognise that have been pain points for you, feel free to make various expressions of exasperation. What I am trying to touch on is the really astonishing number of different things I believe we need to concern ourselves if we are to achieve that original goal of delivering quality pictures, meeting expectations in a reliable and confident way. Here we go. Let's dive in. How are we doing? Physical hardware. Not all CPUs are equal. Indeed, we have seen growth in cache sizes. Cache sizes have an immense impact on the degree to which they manage different types of problem. Bigger caches are more helpful than smaller ones, and this is one facet that will make a difference. We have intrinsics, so these are enhancements to CPU instruction sets that allow microprocessors to work more efficiently, processing multiple data words in parallel. The availability or lack thereof of various intrinsic capabilities will fundamentally change the degree to which that CPU can feel your particular signal processing, your particular process demands. Even something as simple as the CPU clock speed. In many ways, this is one of the most predictable of the elements. Things tend to behave fairly linearly with clock speed. But you'll notice that most CPUs love to talk about their turbo clock speed. If you're working in an opportunistic environment, so you're working offline, marvellous, knock yourself out. If you can take yourself up to 3.5 gigahertz, great. It will deliver the best result it can. The first thing I do when I'm studying a particular resource is to focus in on the base clock speed, because we need to be confident if we're to deliver a predictable live service at the lowest possible latency, we need to know what clock speed will be sustained over time. And as long as we're meeting the cooling requirement for the chip, that it's not going to start thermally throttling some way into our program and lose our service. What else have we got here? There's just plucking out a smattering of considerations from the underlying hardware that we're taking advantage of. And of course, if we are in the cloud, we're using a generic resource or maybe a vendor-supplied resource. So we are going to be choosing from what's available. It's not necessarily what we would have selected by design. So the next category is the configuration of the system. So the reality is where we're using generic and consumer off-the-shelf systems, we tend to be hitting the most popular and the most freely available operating systems. But they themselves will behave differently depending on how or to what degree they've been fine-tuned. So we have things like how their scheduler is set up. We have things like thread affinity. So can we be intelligent? Can we provide hints to the operating system about how it should distribute our threads of execution, our different tasks, so that they play nicely together and the system works efficiently? And despite Ian and my best efforts, this slide really has gone very wrong. We've lost something off the bottom there. But just touching on upgrades and updates, as it occurred to me writing that point, and it sounds really quite innocuous, but if you think back a few years, I wonder if I say the words meltdown and spectre, whether that resurrects in your minds. Probably one of the worst weeks for security notifications that has ever come to pass, or certainly from my perspective. This was the identification of a security weakness within the very silicon of a range of microprocessors. And whilst this was patched very quickly, and those patches were necessarily deployed, I believe it's fair to say that Meltdown introduced a performance reduction of approximately 30% and Spectre of the order of 10 to 15%. Working with that kind of fundamental change in what you can expect for your platform within a week is something that one would never wish upon oneself. It's the kind of thing that we simply didn't have to deal with dedicated systems and solutions, isolated box product. Carrying on, virtualization. So this is very much closely linked with cloud deployment. Because we're abstracting the fundamental resource, virtualization is the mechanism by which we can decide how much we want to bite off and chew. But that does come with some cost overhead. So where we're containerizing our process or we're configuring our hypervisor to manage those different virtual machines, that tends to create yet another bit of loss over and above what we would have obtained from an on-prem piece of bare metal. And then there's three here, which arguably it's a little bit of a stretch to put them under virtualization. But it's the fact that the technology that we want to exploit isn't uniform. Different vendors offer different capabilities and different machine types. They can have different hardware acceleration available or otherwise. Certainly, the same technology isn't available in every data center worldwide where you might be seeking to deploy. And indeed, vendor availability would appear to be a significant issue still. And by that I mean, when we want to exploit the advantage of cloud, we want to scale and deploy at short notice, it's a very sobering situation when you're told that actually the machines that you want to spin up aren't available. These three categories tend to be the concern of the end user who's deploying the process, who's deploying the tool. Unless the technology is a service where it's being deployed by the end user, they're using their own account, they're using their own orchestration and configuration. But this is where I think we need to have excellent dialogue and support between the vendors and the end users, because they know things about the platform that they're wishing to use and the other things deployed on them, yet the vendor can surely bring to bear some advice and some guidance to know how to get the best results. And that's complex, and we've probably not had to have that depth of two-way discussion to make sure that things are working well and working efficiently before. So the final category is in the development of the tool itself. So these software-defined processes, it actually comes down to how it's been implemented, how it's been coded. And indeed, we can craft a solution that gives the answer that we want, but is it optimized to be as efficient as we can possibly make it? Is it going to work well across a broad range of operating systems and underlying technologies? I'm going to come back to that because obviously, as a vendor, these were some of the very interesting pieces of work that we faced, forming our part of allowing us to deploy this technology in the cloud. And away we go. I've teed myself up quite nicely. So, Amdahl's law. Has anyone come across this before? Great, because I really wanted to share this with you, because this was one of those seminal moments for our team when we saw the harsh reality and the unyielding truth behind this incredibly brief, modest equation that we see in the top left-hand corner. And this is the summary of the science that tells us what kind of speed up we can expect when we deploy more compute resource. So hopefully it will make sense to you that despite the growth in microprocessor capability, it's very often the case that a single thread of execution simply can't deal with the complexity of the workload to solve complex media problems. And therefore, the only way to achieve it is to be able to break that algorithm down, refactorize it, and deploy it across multiple threads of execution. And we might collectively expect that if we go from one thread of execution to two threads of execution, that we achieve a speed up of ×2. The real world never plays ball so nicely as that. If the process that we are deploying is truly and absolutely delinked from the other in every conceivable respect, then yes, in theory, you will achieve that 2x speed up. But the reality is very often those threads of execution are coupled in some way, shape or form. They are serialized on one another. What does serialization mean? It means they become queued and they have to wait around. So what are the two causes of that? Well, there's one which comes about by definition. When we process video, video is a sequence of images. So there is an ordering to the content that we're working with. And because of that ordering, there's all manner of processing that concerns itself whether picture B came after picture A. So simply the fact that encoding motion requires understanding of the sequence, or even motion estimation requires an understanding of the image sequence, or things like cadence. There's a lot of properties that have this sequential property to them. And this, even if one minimizes it, can introduce a small amount of serialization. The other source of serialization is if these two things are operating on the same compute node, chances are, despite all of our design efforts, sooner or later there will be a resource contention. And by that we mean two things asked to use the same underlying hardware capability at the same time. Typically, they both want to look at a bit of memory, and one has to wait for the other. If we focus on the green dashed line, we're working with a system where the engineers have been exceedingly thoughtful, and they've worked very hard, and they've reduced that serialization of all their processing to just 5%, which seems incredibly modest to me. But the harsh reality is, so if we look at the right-hand side, on the x-axis here, we've got another logarithmic scale. We're doubling the resource at every graticule. Unfortunately, because it is a log scale, it's a little bit confusing, but believe it or not, the graphs do begin linearly in the bottom left-hand corner, so roughly 2 units of resource have led to a 2 times speed up. But very quickly, this drops off. So by the time we've applied 32 threads of execution, we're in fact only achieving a times 12 speed up. And as you can see, every single graph rolls off eventually. So no matter what additional resource we apply to the problem, we are going to make no difference whatsoever. This is very sobering indeed. It means that simply saying that we will temporarily afford a larger instance type, more often than not, will not solve your problem. It might get you out of a hole if you're very close to being in a stable, successful configuration. But you can be much too optimistic about this. So I can summarize Admiral's Law with these 3 pithy little quotes. So it's ultimately the speed up is constrained by what proportion can be parallelized. And the second line just feels all too familiar for those team meetings a decade back when we were reworking the IP to deploy as a software process. The speed up is frequently much slower than one might expect. So often the team would perform little miracles. So we had guys who would take a particular task, they would tune, they would craft, they would refactor, they could get a times 5 reduction in that particular process. Yet the harsh reality was that we would still only encounter a few % of overall system difference. So to get the results on any of the processing that you're deploying has involved an awful lot of hard work. And in fact, it turns out that Amdahl's law is another way of formalizing a phrase that we're probably all relatively familiar with, which is the law of diminishing returns. So then moving on to another realization that we came to, and that is, again, it's illustrating the impact of this system asynchronicity. So in the top left here, I've got a particular task, a particular process. It's solving one job type, one sub-element of our algorithm. And we're running it on a platform, and we're seeing its latency to complete bounce around. So the trend line there is telling me that it's nominally about 30 milliseconds latency, but we've got about plus or minus 8 milliseconds of noise. And then down here, we've got a second task that's forming part of our problem. In this case, it's taking slightly longer on average at 40 milliseconds and possibly plus or minus 10 milliseconds of noise. Now, you might imagine that we're going to end up with a system with about plus or minus 10 milliseconds of noise in the latency at which we achieve our desired finished result. Doesn't work like that. What we actually obtain is this distribution that we can see on the right-hand side. So in fact, there's a whopping 140 milliseconds of latency a variation in completing our task in this illustration of the problem. And the more data that we put in, the more it averages to actually give us what in fact turns out, according to the theory, is a Gaussian distribution. So how does this distribution relate to what we're actually trying to do? I've marked 3 points of interest on our distribution. Point A is ultimately our target latency. We know we have obtained the result for at least a few outputs from our algorithm, probably frames, with a latency as low as 500 milliseconds. We can see that the average is 570, and this would be deeply informative for that opportunistic offline processing. But ultimately, where we're concerned with delivering at minimum latency, we have to take into account the worst case scenario, which is C, which is very unfortunate because, as you can see, in accommodating those very small number, just a tiny percentage of our results on the right-hand side there, but in accommodating them, we've actually had to sacrifice some latency that we'd really rather not do so. So how can we improve on this? We simply have to knuckle down on all of those sources of asynchronous variation that we've been discussing. The more that we can minimize that noise, the more this distribution will narrow and collapse and move to the left and reduce our achievable latency and get us towards that target, which is the answer that we're really after. When we deploy in the cloud, we have a whole plethora of different processing that we may need to bring to bear. And my input into this solution is really on these two aspects that might need to be employed on the right-hand side. So that's feed normalization or standards conversion. So these are dealing with cases where either what we're receiving or what we're trying to output don't have the video properties that we require. So this technology can be deployed front end or back end. And as Ian said, interestingly, one of the problems that taxes people is the confidence that they're going to receive what they're expecting to receive. So a very long time ago, if you could actually get the physical connector to turn and stay attached, you could be fairly confident that more often than not you'd actually be able to interpret the signal that came through it. But since the move to IP-based and packet-based connectivity, the breadth of signal that you can successfully transport is basically unlimited. But whether we're handling it in the way that we intend is a different question. So the other thing that's changed over the years is originally, if a box wasn't intended to do something, if it wasn't designed to understand a particular signal property, it would basically halt, it would refuse. The trend has been for technology to become very good at trying to give you an answer, but it's failing silently. It's going to be giving you conversions for which it wasn't really designed, for which it hasn't got a quality performance that you've actually built in and planned for. So having this toolkit to deal with sudden and last minute unexpected properties like interlace where you were expecting progressive, not the resolution that you're working to, or heaven forfend the wrong frame rate, fortunately, some of these more heavy lift bits of signal processing are available to deploy in the cloud, and that's where they become relevant. So this is my area of expertise, my hobby horse, my working career, and Ian very much encouraged me to just touch on briefly this aspect of standards conversion, because there's really two aspects of education here. Number one is that this was traditionally something that was never conceived could be deployed at quality on these generic processing resources. And I can reassure everyone that it is, and it is at the best quality standards that people could want for. This is simply illustrating that in the case of a frame rate change, if we don't use an intelligent process, the result invariably, in one way, shape or form, is going to be some kind of blending between different frames. So we're overlaying different content. That is going to lose us clarity and fidelity because we're going to be obscuring all of the finer texture and detail in the image. And I think you can see there's a number of synthesized motion speeds here for a simple caption, and arguably only the last is truly straightforwardly legible. And I come back to that first diagram quite often that we looked at, where we've got acquisition on the left-hand side and distribution on the right. And people are working unbelievably hard and paying a lot of money to get the best possible acquisition they can. They're buying the right lenses, they're using the standard of camera, they're getting the illumination in. At the back end, they're using quality CDNs, they're affording the bandwidth. And all of these high production values, all of this work can be so easily lost by one unintended conversion happening as part of our central link in the middle. And again, just again, a quick real-world example. It's so much more naturalistic to look at football players who have 2 arms rather than 6. Okay, so another one that's been jiggled, darn. Not to worry, you can still read the words. How do we deal with these asynchronous problems? So if anyone has got better answers, I can't wait to hear them, by the way. So I'm very keen to get everyone else's input this evening. But empirical testing, I think, is simply unavoidable. There's too much variability and complexity not to actually test the configurations with these standards that you intend to use. And once you've worked out what works, is to capture in some way those configurations in a way that you can deploy them again repeatably and with confidence. And again, we've got some very simple aspects of detailed planning so that we know in advance what we need to do as much as how we're going to achieve it. And then there's also continued work by the vendors to be as efficient as they possibly can be, and supporting the users to make sure that we're all achieving the end outcome. And it's a very exciting field. There's some fantastic new technologies coming along to help us. I'm sure you've all heard of these. So live production exchange, I think, will help us know what signal we're expecting to receive, and hopefully built into it will be value information that lets us, and content information that lets us know which of our smorgasbord of processes we need to bring to bear. The media exchange layer is fantastic for improving efficiency where vendors are passing data between them. We've just had the IBC accelerator, the master control cloud, which is absolutely addressing and looking into the problem that we're talking about today. And then cloud native agile production. The use of time addressable media stores is opening the door to some very exciting new workflows. So the future is definitely going to be keeping us busy. But to our original question, my answer is that it is real, but it's also still fluffy. So there's no question that the pioneers are delivering. There's no question that some very high-profile events have been successfully delivered to end users. But are we always doing it in a way that we're absolutely confident we can repeatedly achieve those sky-high expectations in quality? I think that's where we're all still learning lessons, and there's probably still some grounds for further progress.
Well, I thought that was excellent. Thank you very much. We've got 5 minutes before the break, so you don't get your food and drink for nothing. There's got to be some questions. Anybody fancy asking a question? There we go. Usual protocol. Wait for your mic.
I'm afraid I'm not an expert, so not ready to take a question.
You don't have to apologise. That's our technical failure.
My question is, the cloud's obviously various aspects to it, from where it's produced, getting it through to distribution point down to the individual. Which is the biggest problem? Is it actually internet providers, so that you get, when I get buffering, if I'm watching something, is it likely to be the problem my end, towards where I am, or are there likely to be problems nearer where it's produced? I'm thinking, for instance, if you've got Formula One, which I understand is produced from Biggin Hill, and everything's controlled remotely. Where are the problems actually getting to Biggin Hill, or getting from Biggin Hill to your television?
Is there anyone who can really hone in on that question? Because ultimately, the challenge is there are so many places where those kind of deficits could be introduced. And so one of the challenges, I think it's fair to say, is the demand on the ability to monitor accurately, to pin down the location and the cause of problems quickly and accurately, has always been an issue, but I think it's even more so with the additional challenges and complexity of this sort of form of remote working.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the subliminal comment about challenges for monitoring, because, I mean, you know, within the professional area that we're responsible for, if you've got enough money and you've got skillful enough engineers, you can look into your own domain. But the thing about streaming is once you release it, there are all manner of things that are challenges. First and foremost, that media, the internet wasn't created for media, real-time media. File-based makes it slightly easier, but we are fighting with a resource that doesn't lend itself well to packet switch networks. And I think that you need to have a wizard hat on to be able to diagnose and say, I think the problem's here. And sadly, it actually comes down to how good is your monitoring and how holistic a view do you have in your operations room, what's going on, and particularly what's going on in your CDN, what's going on in your player, what's going on in your browser, all of those kind of things. And it even gets down to traffic management. And those are things that were never really a problem in a deterministic satellite sports environment. So unfortunately, that's where the hard work's really got to be done.
There are a plethora of areas upstream of actually delivering through a CDN to the end user, where there are major challenges. I work with a motorsport organisation where we've had similar challenges over the last couple of weeks with some frame drops we've been trying to diagnose. And it's going all the way back to a source camera, making sure that the packets are flowing correctly out of the back of the IP end from the camera, going into distribution networking, IP distribution networking, coming into a service that I run, which is called a relay, which basically is listening to multicast network, taking those multicast streams, converting those to unicast to deliver up to an AWS service called Media Connect, and trying to diagnose packet drops, seemingly that happen at random, which we've now, after about a week and a half, 2 weeks effort of multiple people from AWS, from the motorsport organisation, from my organisation, it comes down to a driver version on an individual instance that's caused the problem with dropping packets, and basically some context switching that's caused the problem. And so every part of your chain, from the camera through every single part of the encoding chain, every single delivery switch, all the way through, packaging for ABR, delivering out to the CDN, all the way out to the end user, you've got to have really, really, really good monitoring through every single step. It's a complete minefield, but it's a really exciting one to be part of.
I think very relevant comments.
Wow, doesn't that feel like you're on real live television or on real live streaming? Firstly, thank you, James, for an incredible presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, there's no way I'm going to take you down a deep technical road and try and beat that at all. What I do want to do is to give you a little flavour as to why Ian and I thought about doing this tonight, which was all about why the technical side of the FIFA Club World Cup with DAZN, for which M2A Media, the company I am with, provided the primary head end. And so I'm just going to set the scene in a moment. If we can run VT there, I'll show a little show reel.
Here we go! Countdown with me!
Reshaping the way people consume sport. It's part of our vision.
revolutionary. It's groundbreaking.
This is the next step.
We're so happy you're here with us.
32 of the world's top clubs.
The club game has never seen a competition of this scale before.
30 segundos. Salut à tous ceux qui...
Hello?
It's fun, isn't it?
Soy yo del Inter.
River Plate.
قبل الانتقال.
Let's go!
Bastoni to seal the win for Inter.
Presented by our friends at Michelob.
You have to perform at your best.
Really looking forward to this one.
Welcome to the press. The universe did provide.
The supernova of champions. The world's finest teams.
They are good.
Messi! Una meraviglia!
On the way to the airport. Claude Makalele, it's nice to have you here.
This is why we love this game.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
1 against 1, go. What a beautiful moment. It's marvelous. It's magical.
This is crazy, right?
So how many football fans have we got in the room? Hands up, come on. We've got a few. That's a few more than there are in my organisation. I'm a cyclist and not a football fan. I've got 2 left feet. I'm going to tell you first off a little bit about M2A, which does stand for 2 M's and an A, but we've changed that a little bit to stand for Media to Anywhere, which is a series of products that we've just been launching at IBC this year. I say that because I rewind to a year ago when I joined the company. I joined at IBC 2024, and I thought, that's great. It's just 1 quarter in the run up to 2025. I've got time to get to know the people, time to get to know Andy and his colleagues. Have a look at the strategy and see what we're going to do in 2025, and we can build up to a nice plan. Got that all nice and ready by Christmas, and we come back in the new year and we get a phone call. Can we have a meeting, please, from DAZN? Well, we've bought the rights to this little thing called the Club World Cup. The what? The Club World Cup. Now, not being a footballer, I suddenly become a footballer when it's the FIFA World Cup. I'm supporting England because I live here. I'm supporting Ireland because I grew up there. I'm supporting the winner, really. And I was thinking, Club World Cup, really? Is this going to take off? No. How many viewers do you think you're going to get? Well, not so sure. We think we need to build it for, was it 100 million? Crikey. Okay, 100 million viewers on streaming. Well, that's kind of what we love, because we love a challenge. A little bit about M2A. The 2 M's and an A were ex-BBC, people highly involved in developing BBC iPlayer, so you can see that they've got a thing or two to know about streaming and about VOD. We specialise only in live, so everybody in our teams, in the ops teams and in the company, likes a little bit of an adrenaline rush. And as we all know, live, there is no rehearsal. And it's a great strapline I'd love to use for marketing one day. This is not a rehearsal, but I think somebody used it before. But we specialise in live content distribution in 3 primary areas. Live to consumers, which we do primarily for people like DAZN, so we get it to the CDNs, which they then get to their apps. We do live to VOD, so we get it onto the VOD platforms immediately after the live broadcast has happened. So anything that you here in this country watch on ITVX, which was a live broadcast, goes through our system to get it onto ITVX immediately after the live broadcast has finished. And we do live B2B connections. So if you've got a live event coming out of New York and you need to get 2 deliveries to Sydney, 5 to Tokyo, 3 to Hong Kong, that's what we specialize in. We also have created, the main product that we focus on is our console, which allows you to both automate and orchestrate live streams. Why are the 2 different words? Well, when you've got a live event which is 3 hours long, you might want to fire it up an hour beforehand for the punditry, maybe half an hour before that, in order to get all the services onto the instance correctly, and you want to spin it down an hour after the event has completed. Amazon make an awful lot of money by people forgetting to spin down the servers. We automate that whole process. What we then do is we orchestrate all the different streams. So for example, for the J-League in Japan, there are 25 to 30 different workflows that need to take place from that one live event. The Australians might want it in one format. They need to get it through the Great Firewall of China to another taker over there, etc. We orchestrate all of those as one block, which means that operators can now quite easily use that tool to be able to extend the game, to shorten the game, to move the features and to operate it purely as one block. And what it also allows is rights holders. So for example, with the Club World Cup, where at the last minute we discovered, or we were informed, that there was a new taker in another country, oh, suddenly we need to add another workflow. So that's the kind of orchestration that we specialize in. Here's the kind of customers that we work with. We're not allowed to talk about Formula One, except in a private environment like this. DAZN, one of our biggest customers. FIBA, the Federation of International Basketball. Channel 4, for whom we do pop-up events. I mentioned some of the things we do with our good friends at ITV, and also with smaller brands like Universal Tennis, Japan Rugby, and our friends, the system integrator Photron in Japan, who serve multiple customers, one of whom is the Japan Football League. I show you this map because these are all the data centers that, well, not all of, yes, they are all of the data centers that are used by AWS. And we've introduced this year a very cool little feature within our product to be able to literally click and drag. I've got a live event coming up in London. I want to get that to Sydney, to Singapore, to Tokyo, and over to Virginia or Washington. And I can set it up quite easily with the number of takers in each of those countries and automate the creation of all the data that's required in order to give to the takers in each of those areas. And that's a useful tool when you have to deliver such an experience like the FIFA Club World Cup. The ladies at the marketing department, Sophia in DAZN, was very kind to send me this when I asked her for an image for tonight, and she sent it with the DAZN logo and with the M2A Media logo. Well, we've got great partners in the room tonight. Anybody from TechX here? Anybody from MediaKind? There was somebody on the list. MediaKind was also a provider on the head end. Grass Valley, Amagi. I mean, the whole list of providers that were contributing to this with DAZN is quite large. I want to say thanks to these three gentlemen from DAZN, Nick Taylor, Risto Peshev and Harry Backhouse, because the following few slides are actually theirs. So, they set up an operations centre within their facility in Leeds to drive everything within the Club World Cup. And just a little bit of background about DAZN. 200 markets they serve, and they are the world's biggest and first global sports platform. I think if you go back, you'll see the iterations of what the companies were that created DAZN. I often liken them to the sports version of Netflix, but they're right on the edge. 15 core markets with a significant rights portfolio, which you can see in the middle. Rumour has it that they paid FIFA $1 billion. I say rumour has it because it was never publicly fully released how much they paid for the rights for the FIFA World Cup. The reason I mention that is because this, to me, was a seismic shift in our world. We talked about the technology moving from where we were many years ago. I was chatting with the chief engineer here before the event started. We were having a laugh about having started out on tape and splicing tape and the blocks on 1/4-inch and 1/2-inch tapes. Then we moved to file-based workflows, and now we're in the cloud. The FIFA organization was the first global sporting organization to flip the model on its head. In the past, European broadcasters used to talk to Eurovision, and they used to represent the European broadcasters, and they'd go, okay, how much do you want Olympics? How much do you want FIFA? And there would be the negotiation back and forth, and then all the broadcasters would get the rights. And then over time, oh, you want the rights and you want to stream it as well? Okay, well, that'll be another price over here, but you can only stream it so many minutes or so many hours after the live game has been broadcast in your country or after midnight, etc. Those rules still sometimes apply. However, FIFA turned it on its head and they gave the rights to DAZN and said, well, gave the rights. Give us $1 billion and you can have the rights for free. They awarded the rights to DAZN, and DAZN were then permitted to go out and recoup their investment by selling the rights to national broadcasters around the world, and also do their advertising and put it on the free-to-air freemium channels on their subscriber network, which then boosts their subscribers and their publicity. So that's the professional angle that I think it has had the seismic shift. The personal angle is that I think it's the first time ever that whether you're in Burkina Faso, Brixton or Japan, we're all watching the same feed. We're all watching the same game produced in the same way worldwide. And I think how many commentaries were there? Was it 17 different languages?
17 different languages, yeah.
Right.
But with commentary, there's like 27 different variants.
Right. Last year, DAZN put out 1.2 billion hours. Was that through us?
Yes.
It's a few hours more this year, given the Club World Cup. 110,000 live sports events. Was that through us?
Yes.
And you can see the rights contracts. And I don't know about you, but I can't go a day without seeing another rights contract that DAZN have bought this or DAZN have bought that. Or they went and bought the Australian company, Foxtel, and they've got the rights to, is it Bundesliga now for next year, or is it?
Yeah, and NHL as well as a more recent one. Yeah.
So there you go. They're only growing, and they're only going in one direction, and we have to keep up. The volumes are just seriously huge. That phone call that asked us to get together in January, you're thinking, okay, well, we've got the Club World Cup in June, that's 6 months. No, actually, no, January to June, that's 5 months. Then you're doing a month of testing, that's 4. Then you've got to have everything up and running and teams in place, that's 3. Okay, boys and girls, we've got 6 weeks to get this up and running. And I think then DAZN turned around and said, no, you don't. You've got 10 days. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. You've got 10 days to prove to us you can make this. And that was when the neck was on the line. So you can see here some of the other figures as well. I thought your slide was detailed. You said it was detailed. It's not as detailed as this. You can read some of the small print if you want, but basically the acquisition was brought in using NEP, who had facilities in Dallas and South Florida. It came into Leeds and Bangor, which is where the DAZN's main operations are. Amagi and Grass Valley put the play out to the transmission teams, and the transmission teams were in Leeds, sending it out to the MCRs. Okay, you probably can make a little bit more sense of this than me, so I'll leave that for a little moment. We're in there somewhere. I can't remember where exactly we are, but we're there. There we are, linear play out and head end up on the top right. This was DAZN's new MCR. And although I put the photograph of us down here, it sort of looks like it merges into that because we upstakes from Farringdon, where our MCR is located. We've got 3 MCRs, one in Bangladesh, one in London, one in Portland. But we took the London one mostly up to Leeds, and we camped out literally next door to this room because we felt this was such an important event. It was critical that their engineers or our engineers could literally walk into the next room. Got a problem with this. Are you seeing that? I'm seeing it. Where is it? And then, as Andy mentioned earlier, you're tracing back up the line to find where the issues are. Thankfully, there were no real problems, but if you ask Andy a hard question later, he might tell you where the problems were. And this is where we were. As I mentioned, we had 4 head ends for this. We normally have 2, and that was another part of the big shock in January was that, do you remember what you spent the last 7 years building for us, M2A? That's fantastic. Could you build it again, please? You've got 4 months. MediaKind were also there providing head end, as were Amagi and Compass and various others in the process. Some of the numbers from the DAZN side, 1,007 different lineups completed by the MCR, 11 on-site production lineups, 295 studio games lined up, 701 commentator and world feed lineups, 2.5 to 3 hours, well, I've got the exact minutes of that if you want, of what it was per game, and 30 checks per lineup per stream. That's a really interesting one because when you're checking, when you get everything ready and you call in the different countries for the lineups, then you get a cultural challenge. Each country deals with its own culture naturally. Each national broadcaster, whether it's the national broadcaster or the commercial broadcaster, we all know how we all operate in our own country. But actually, when you're calling in Germany, are you ready? Yeah, we're here. Brazil, there's nobody there. Where is everybody? Camera Brazil, they're not there. So they had to do 2 or 3 lineups with Brazil. So various countries operate. So from a social perspective, I think it's really interesting to watch a global broadcaster having to deal with all of this and learn from it at the same time. From our perspective, 29 days, only 63 matches. How many games are there in the Premiership? More than that, aren't there? 12 city locations and 47 events per scheduled match. But here's some of the big numbers. And it's not the biggest one that I find the most interesting. 18,000 pipelines orchestrated, 210,000 renditions encoded, 80 million minutes encoded, 650 million minutes packaged, 1.2 billion CPU minutes used. But it's that one. Inside 4 weeks, we had to fire up just shy of 100,000 instances. Make sure that they were all properly installed. Make sure that they had the right services on them. Make sure that the game actually ran okay, and everything that Andy has mentioned earlier in checking things when something doesn't look right and making sure you catch it before it gets anywhere near a viewer, and then spinning it down again. 100,000 instances. My wife said to me, "Is that like me firing up my NHS computer, but you're doing it on the other side of the world?" I said, "Yes, and we're doing all of that, but it's a little bit more modern than your NHS computer." So there we go. There's some of the numbers, and there's a little bit about M2A and a little bit about the Club World Cup, and I hope you enjoy the discussion that Ian's going to host now.
Well, this is very good, isn't it?
Have we kept the time? We did.
And I get to tell a CEO where to sit. You go and sit there. I need my...
Do you need it?
No, I don't.
Oh, no, you don't need that.
That's yours. You can have it before Christmas. As I say, I've achieved if you ask more questions than I do. But we'll kick things off. I mean, there are a few people who you might not be familiar with. So do you just want to briefly introduce yourselves, the 4 people sitting down, and
Sure.
Any kind of personal interest that you have in streaming to make it interesting?
Wow,
Fill
okay.
your boots.
I'll come up with something. Hi, I'm Andy Wilson. I'm VP of Customer Success at M2A. I look after all of our kind of technical operations for our customers, and I also look after our professional services team. DAZN are one of my bigger customers, and I get the privilege of working with them day in, day out.
Hi, I'm Carolina Santos. I'm Director of Sales Engineering at Singularity, part of IMG. On a day-to-day basis, I will work with clients and our sales team to come up with a solution. Before that, I spent 6 years actually working directly with a federation.
I'm Ciarán Doran, CEO of M2A Media. I joined a year ago, as I mentioned earlier, and Carolina worked with ATP and was a very close friend of M2A Media at that time there.
I'm sure you've heard enough from me, but James Shepard, CTO at InSync Technology, and Mr. All Things Conversion.
OK, well, to get the ball rolling, let's go, first of all, with you, Andy. Well, what do you regard as the major growth area for sports streaming in terms of rights and content? And in thinking about this, giving you a chance, we've talked about a lot of traditional events, Tier 1, Tier 2, but I'm sure a lot of people who are here today are really interested in exploiting rights that probably aren't recognised as rights now, where people are flipping the model on their head and looking to actually monetize things that people don't actually recognise as being streamed events. What do you think?
I mean, obviously, DAZN as one of my biggest customers, they've made kind of massive waves in sports rights, and certainly in the last year. Obviously, with the acquisition of Club World Cup, it's kind of flipped everything on its head, as Ciarán said. Having a sports streamer being given such prodigious rights, and globally as well, is absolutely unique. Hopefully, it's not the last time this happens. We're hoping that it'll happen again and again, and we'll see that actually streaming first is certainly beneficial to an audience that expects all their content to be available wherever they are, not just on a lean-back device in TV. They want it to be available on all their devices, whether it be a laptop, an iPad, or a phone when they're out. There's an expectation in market that the content's always going to be available and on the device that they choose at the time. But buying rights of $1 billion to a Tier 1 event like Club World Cup is great. But actually, there are loads of other kind of grassroots organisations that also want to get as part of this pie as well, and also want to be able to deliver content out to, as wide an audience as they can. To an extent, DAZN do this with, they have rights for thousands of different leagues around the world. If you want to watch chess at 2 in the morning, you can go onto the chess channel and see that through DAZN. If you want to watch timber sports, which I'm a big fan of, whenever I'm traveling to the US, I always end up turning onto a timber sports channel, seeing people with chainsaws demolishing things. It's brilliant. It's mind-numbing TV. It's perfect for me when I'm traveling. But yeah, no, DAZN have got the rights to that as well. You know, there's a Tiddlywinks Championship they've got rights to. You know, anywhere you can try and get viewers onto the DAZN platform, they will acquire that content and try and get it out to a wider audience as possible. It's quite astonishing how many different services they have. But I see, you know, people like DAZN and maybe some smaller tier 2 like streamers are making massive inroads in being able to enable smaller organisations to be able to get their rights out to a market, and that's something that hasn't happened up till now, really.
Do you think that's going to gain some momentum because you're already seeing, you know, sort of particular sports federations no longer awarding rights or fragmenting the rights between streaming and subscription-based, that either it's diluting the subscription rights for the major broadcasters, or it's about trying to monetize, you know, real fanatics who will pay a subscription? I mean, how do you see that developing in terms of a service?
I think that's going to get more prevalent. You know, we all see that the national sports organisations want to try and bring some of the rights back in-house, so they can actually directly monetize the user base that's out there that wants to consume the content. It's not just actually watching the matches, it's watching all of the surrounding around the matches, like all the team previews, all the in-depth features on the players. It's about, you know, the charitable donations and the charitable organisations that they sponsor, and having the teams involved in these and the players involved in these. It's this whole encompassing ecosystem of content that consumers want to consume, and actually by the rights owners bringing their main properties back in house as well means that they're able to leverage that to get eyes on their platform more and more. The difficulty is that obviously the large rights owners I've got very, very used to selling large bundles of content to big broadcasters, such as to Sky or to Comcast or to X, Y, and Z provider. It's difficult to wean themselves off those big billion-dollar paychecks they're getting for that content, and then trying to take the risk of actually, well, can we actually sell this to our existing user base and still reap that much revenue? That's a really, really difficult thing to come up with.
Because, I mean, it's arguable at the moment that a lot of people are testing the water with quite expensive platforms and infrastructure. And I suppose a lot of what was being alluded earlier was bankrolling and sort of trying to pre-charge the market. And there hasn't appeared to be any stability in that in terms of what's a reasonable level of functionality or, you know, MCR production value. You know, there's endless scope for that. But how do you think that's going to reconcile itself?
I think over time, you know, I think the investments that the various leagues or sports organisations are going to have to make, it will pay off in time as we start to see consumers taking more of a direct approach with you know, either with clubs getting their own content back, or with the big sports organisations like Premier League taking their own content back. But I think it's going to take a number of years to wean themselves off, you know, the revenues they're going to get for the larger broadcasters, and to build trust in the audience that they can actually deliver reliably. And that's a really, really big thing around you know, around sports. You know, you can't get it wrong. The moment you drop frames, the moment you drop you know, you drop signal somewhere, you absolutely guarantee that's going to be one of the best goals will be scored, because that's just the law of averages. That happens. You know, you can't get it wrong, and certainly in live sports, consumers are, well, they rapidly go from mildly annoyed to apoplectic within seconds. And you know, if you don't get things right throughout your chain and give a really, really seamless user experience, you'll know about it very quickly through social media and your support channels. So it's not just investment in taking rights back. There's a massive investment in actually to procure, manage, and, you know, deliver and then operate these really complex IP delivery systems. And I think that's one of the biggest areas of challenge for, you know, for the big rights owners.
Anybody in the audience got any view on that or want to ask a question? Still all very timid. Come on, I've got to get questions. It's got to be 50-50.
I thought Mr. Beale might ask a question, but no.
Okay. Well, it's okay. I can continue, but, you know, that's one down for the audience, 1-0 up for us panellists, and the audience, you're doing bad in terms of asking questions. I'll move on. I mean, you did a great presentation there, James, but how do you actually advise your customers between the balance between on-prem, you know, virtualized on-prem versus cloud? There are breakpoints in terms of the functionality, a bit like renting a car. You know, there's a certain point at which it makes more sense for you to own your own infrastructure or deploy in the cloud. You must have customers who are asking advice on that kind of issue.
We do get asked for advice, but I would say that in the main, customers actually have done an awful lot of thinking about this, which is a relief for us because I suppose, turning to that point, sometimes when you actually help a customer plan out and recognise what they're proposing to uplift into the cloud, you do find on occasion that some people get some nasty surprises, and perhaps they've been swept up in the hype of all the benefits. And if I had to pick one item, which probably helps everyone make this decision, whether it's the customer in advance or the customer once we've actually started to burrow down into the detail, it's the price. There's no two ways about it. So I think it tends to be really what the customer wants to do. If you are delivering high bandwidths repeatedly all the time, you're going to typically want to own and have control of that infrastructure. And I don't know how the landscape's going to evolve. I dare say there's a lot of competition, and as more people adopt these working practices, maybe it's going to create pressures that will change the situation. But currently, I would say, and for the foreseeable future, the true deployment on public vendor services is being reserved for that final uplift, for that final very short-term defined uplift that doesn't fall within the sort of standard requirement.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to have a... Go on.
So we've got to level the score for the audience.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
On that subject, a topic that was discussed a lot at some of the conferences at IVC was FinOps, which is the financial operations assessment. And I think there's a lot more. Go back 2 years, there was a mad rush to get the tech into the cloud. I think now there's a lot more analysis and understanding of the actual costs and where you deploy, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. So I think that's maybe from some of the things we've seen in the presentation, the missing term was FinOps, perhaps.
Well, that's an excellent point, and annoying, because one of the slides that I cut out this afternoon was specifically about that. I think I was trying to be respectful, because how people actually go about ascertaining the cost model, which cloud pricing model they adhere to. Usually most people find it's a surprise 2 quarters after they've commissioned a service and go, oh my God, this is coming back on-prem. I don't know. I mean, that's a perfect question for a CEO, isn't it?
Well, it was kind of deliberately left out because it's not like DAZN had a blank check, but they couldn't go wrong. There was no way that this would be allowed to fail. So something for the whole of that 5-month period, the word resilience, I learned how to spell resilience. It's like resilience, 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 test, test, test. And I've always had a motto in this field of work out everything that can possibly go wrong and then do everything in your power to make sure it doesn't. Because there will be things that will happen on the night, on the day, that you could never have predicted. But that was DAZN's whole mantra, was about resilience. So it wasn't a case that there was no cost associated. There was a cost, and there was, it depends how you judge it, whether there was a heavy cost or not. They had a different goal. They had only 5 months. The 2032 World Cup is already known where that's going to be. The Club World Cup was decided at the last minute, and there's no way you could have done what everybody did, not just us, what everybody did in that 5-month period by doing it on-prem. It was just phenomenal. So that's the difference where cloud kicks in significantly.
Yeah.
But you must see that on your front with live events. But you're not using the cloud, are you?
No, not at the moment. Not at the moment within our organisation. But again, perhaps we have more of the luxury of time than you did on that one. We normally get a little bit more of a. Dave's rolling his eyes at me. We normally get a little bit more time to prepare, and it really depends if you're looking at it from a series of events that will repeat themselves, and therefore hardware makes sense. You will have a multi-year contract, multiple events, and therefore you have that time to depreciate your capex and be able to pass those savings on to your customer, versus you just have to deploy it quick. So I think there's a balance there, definitely.
I think that goes back to your point, Neil, in that there was this buzz, like there's been buzzes in the industry for many different subjects, and there was this buzz a few years ago. The cloud is the new emperor's clothes or whatever. We've all got to move to the cloud. It's going to transform everything. And there is a realization now in the last couple of years of, let's do it where it makes sense.
Yeah.
Which, when you think about it, it's what makes sense.
And it came about at the same time as COVID, right?
Right.
We all had to move really quickly when COVID hit. We all had to go remote. If you wanted a live event done anywhere around the world, you had to go remote, because you were very restricted on the number of people you could be shipping around, special restrictions, permissions. I mean, every country had its own set rules. So everyone went remote very quickly. And that meant that I think certain parts of a production then had to be broken up and done in different places because you physically couldn't get people there. And perhaps it also accelerated the adoption of cloud.
I want to get your take on this subject in a moment, because I don't know if anybody here is playing jargon bingo tonight. No, anybody? So nobody...
Maybe we should.
Nobody yet has mentioned the famous two-letter acronym, AI.
Oh, you spoiled that. That was the next question.
I think it is on the English.
Well, let me
say it like that.
Let me preface before you get to your question, because it comes back to that subject we talked about earlier about grassroots and about other sports. The two comments I wanted to make on the grassroots was I've got some guys I know in Ireland, two guys who used to work for Microsoft, Larry Doyle and his brother, set up a couple of cameras at the end of Gaelic games. They got such an uptake from their friends and relations in the village and the town. You know, Dad's gone off to Dublin to take the daughter to the university to check out, but wants to see the match. It's a different type of subscriber. It's not global. It's not even international. It's country, it's town, it's region. It's very specific layer sport. They're now doing something like 190 games a week. So add to that story that Jack McGill from QTV in Glasgow told me a few weeks ago of their tests with AI-driven studio productions, studio direction. Bit frightening in a way, but...
Put us all out of a job?
Well, no, because there's a point on that in a moment, where it's currently getting 80 to 90% of the direction right. Do you know what? For some sports we never ever saw, that's good enough. And the thing that I always remember with technology is as technology becomes more prevalent, as technology becomes cheaper, we don't use less of it. We use more of it. Just apply that. Think of anything you can think of, and you'll realise we do. We use more of it. We use more of our phones than ever before, and it's so cheap to use. So I don't think we'll be done out of jobs. I think more will be done in different ways.
And that will empower some of the smaller players, right? And some of the lower tier sports organisations or rights organisations, because the cost to entry will be lower.
Exactly. And the fight for eyeballs continues. Sorry for stealing your thunder.
No. More than happy for you to do. But I mean, I think that there is this fear factor, but I genuinely think for the lower tier sports or the sports that aren't monetised or the particular broadcast affiliation or club is actually trying to initiate it, that's actually an enabler. And I mean, I think that there is a dilemma in the business that you're talking about, you know, quite sophisticated processing being applied, but quite sophisticated program is applied to stability control in camcorders. And, you know, you've not got to think too far before that can actually, you know, sort of cover a game. But at the same time, you're still dealing with this fundamental fact. And I applaud people who get that balance between on-prem and cloud. That the fact that the cloud does not like big amounts of ingress and egress, which remote production does imply if you're backhauling significant number of feeds. I was going to ask, just run down the line, you know, what you think about AI's prospects. We know what Ciarán thinks because he rudely jumped in on that. But what do you think about it? Do you think it's got a place? And do you think that we're going to see people offering services, you know, where AI is going to surprise us and expand the market?
I think AI is extremely exciting. It feels like we are on the cusp of another revolution and another explosion of opportunities in what we can do with engineering, and then rolling that out to see how that can affect everyone's roles. One of the problems with AI is an awful lot of different things fall underneath that umbrella. So I think we've already heard some hints of how there's tools, there's support and augmentation for what we're trying to do. It's sort of giving everyone superpowers to deliver more than they are. The question I suppose I get asked most frequently as someone who's involved in signal processing is, how am I deploying or using, or am interested in AI to actually affect the actual video pictures themselves? And that's where I have my own slightly wry take on things, because I do rather delight in telling people that I've been using convolutional networks for my entire career. In fact, pretty much every single piece of DSP that I've ever produced is composed of convolutional networks. What's the difference between a convolutional network and convolutional neural network? Well, you tell me. I mean, the best I can come up with is that the weightings have to be linear. But we craft and design our solutions. And at the moment, the models, if they're to train themselves, they're just a bit flabby. They're pretty heavyweight still. And what we've worked so hard to do is to deliver the best bang for the buck. We know that every piece of content for which our process is deployed only has a certain value judgment, and it doesn't warrant 1 hour of a PC grinding away to derive that output frame. Unlike Hollywood, for example, where that does make sense on massively valuable assets. So for the time being, we're bringing a whole raft of different techniques to bear. Some of them might be related to machine learning, but at the end of the day, sometimes we can still come up with some incredibly good results by actually just getting a pen and paper out and doing a little bit of analytic analysis.
Yeah. Anyone else? Any thoughts on AI?
I mean, I think it's already got a place. If you think about AI-generated highlights, that's content that didn't exist before and would have taken a great deal of manpower and money to produce and to make available for viewers.
Okay. Well, oh, microphone, please. Look at that.
Which one?
There, please.
Yeah, perfect. Just come in.
No worries.
Thank you.
So to what extent do you think AI can be used in support tools at the moment? So we've talked about how complex the data flows are, etc. So are there solutions to that?
Yes. Obviously, you know, we're starting to obviously, mine a lot of data as part of looking at end-to-end flows, whether it be from ingest for multitude of different feeds of different types, all the way through kind of the processing chains of transcoding and optimization for ABR ladders and delivery out to the end users, etc., and pulling in CDN logs and the works. There's an awful lot of the data there to actually to go and sift through to work out if there's something going wrong throughout the chain. Deploying some kind of ML algorithms or AI systems to actually start to sift through that data and classify that data and tag the data appropriately it's saving thousands and thousands of person hours. We don't have to go and tail logs anymore to find a problem. actually we can go and look at, go to Amazon Q and make a structured query on Amazon Q to say, tell me all the data points where you see a 404 occurring for a customer and a blip on one of our encoders that's delivering to an origin server. And it will tell us what's going on. It'll give us the path trace all the way through from here's a source feed, here's it coming into M2A, here's it actually going through the different services, and this is where we think the area of issue is. And that means you can rapidly speed up triage process. That's one of the amazing benefits of using AI systems here.
Can I?
So, do you think you'll get to the point where you've got self-healing systems?
I think self-diagnosing, to a certain extent, self-healing where we invoke things like failover modes. I think true self-healing, probably not, because we always like to have a human in the loop to approve changes. AI systems don't get things right 100% of the time. No matter how many fail-safes you put in there, things do go wrong. So having a human in the loop to approve change is something that's absolutely critical. I think when it comes to, again, to live sport, the decisions you make, can be affected within milliseconds. Can either be something great for the user experience or something absolutely catastrophic for the user experience. Personally, I wouldn't put my trust in ML tools yet to make the right decisions there.
So something I used to talk about years ago when being asked about AI and why aren't we doing that, and when I was in the play-out world, and I'm thinking people don't fully understand that point between sending it out and getting it to the viewer and what the business context of that is. There's contracts in place here. Rights don't get sold for free, and there's contracts that are in place, and there's penalties with those contracts, not just for the rights side of things, but for the advertising side of things. At the point of play out or the point of transmission, the point of delivery in a stream, if there's a certain moment of black or a certain moment of the signal not being within a certain tolerance, Coca-Cola don't not pay for the advert. They don't pay for the series of adverts. So the broadcaster isn't just penalised one small piece. It's a significant sum of money. And it's at that point you realise, okay, I'm not going to let a computer take charge of this. However much computers make good decisions over humans, at some point you need to make sure that you have a human in the loop to make sure that absolutely those things are going right. But to your point about self-healing, one of the comments I was going to make was that context of going deep down into the technical dive is one area where AI can help. I spoke a moment ago about the number of live events that we monitor and we produce for various of our customers around the world. There's thousands per month. We know the schedules. The schedules get sucked in. We know the seasons. If we know the seasons and we know the viewership and we can build a pattern of what has happened, then we can build a picture of what will happen, what the viewership is likely to be, what the streaming from certain data centers around the world is going to be, what the quality is possibly going to be. So where I'm really interested in is in the runner of the business is to look at the prediction, not just the healing, but the prediction of where areas could be that we need to invest extra resource, extra monitoring, extra pre-warning, because the last thing we need is anything to happen to make sure that Coca-Cola doesn't pay.
Well, a good referee spots when Andy Beale's going to score a goal for the audience and ask a question. Go on, Andy.
I wanted to go back to the more classic cloud subject. I was interested, I think you said 100,000 instances, Ciarán?
Yeah.
And I was interested to know how much of that you relied on your automation that you talked about, splitting stuff up, and how much you relied on reservation, given that's a seriously high volume, to make sure you had that infrastructure available at the right times across, I assume, exclusively AWS, was it?
There were a lot of reservations put in place, but also a lot of negotiation with partners like Amazon to make sure we got the lowest prices possible. If you're going to be, burning up billions of vCPU hours in a month, and essentially take pretty much your entire year's spend and put it in a month, then Amazon are going to sit up and listen and go, actually, okay, we want you to go, come with us rather than with Google or with Microsoft. So yes, we will negotiate on pricing. But yeah, reservations are key to try and get the cost down, but also being really efficient with how you use those compute units. Only spinning up at the last possible moment before you need to use them. and obviously shutting them down as quickly as possible to basically mitigate overspend.
And of the services you're running, what was your requirement for GPU versus CPU?
We didn't use GPU anywhere. We used CPU only across all of our estate for this event.
There's a question over here. This is great. I'm not having to do anything.
What's the score?
Oh, it's about 4-2.
Obviously, cloud vendor lock-in is a concern for everyone, particularly in the light of recent events where you can see a failure of a single cloud provider affects your entire business.
Yeah.
What are some of the challenges that face vendors in terms of supporting customers through kind of multi-cloud deployments, multiple cloud providers, or a kind of mixed deployment of cloud and on-prem to ensure that they have the same consistent results no matter what workflow, in which cloud? How do we face the challenges of cloud agnostic deployment and workflows compared to, locking in with AWS or everything and designing our whole workflow around AWS?
That's fantastic, because that was number 11 on the question list.
Can I ask for a little clarification on the question? Do you think that working with one cloud provider can't provide resilience?
I mean, as we've seen this week, it takes a single, region failure of a single cloud provider to knock out some of, their core services. AWS, for example, the core of their DNS was running through the zone that failed. So they were seeing kind of very broad knock-on effects from, all of Route 53 for kind of the core services that we use, at least, ends up running through US East 1. So how do we work around those sort of problems where you're lock-in with a single cloud vendor, regardless of the level of resilience you built in with that cloud vendor? How do you plan and mitigate against the outcomes of that?
Don't rely on some of those core services, basically. If you know that vendor in question, Amazon, have got single region dependencies for things like identity and access management, for Route 53, for Dynamo Global Tables, and it was Dynamo and Route 53 that both had problems on Monday last week. You make sure that you mitigate that. So, I mean, none of our customers went dark when this happened. Our customers were absolutely happy. We were running events around the globe without any issues at all. Yes, we noted first thing in the morning, we went into one of our incident stand-ups at 9 a.m. Oh, we're having some login problems. Oh, well, we'll use one of our other mechanisms to authenticate to get into the right customer accounts to do triage. We had policies in place so that if there is a critical issue in US East 1, always seems to be US East 1, if there's a critical issue there, we've got a backup strategy and we can always get access to things. So, by default, we always deploy in multiple regions. Our control plane and our customer data planes, we always try and get them across multiple regions as possible. For Club World Cup, we normally use 2 for the zone. We moved that to 4. We did have the capability to move to 5 or 6 if you wanted to, if there was something catastrophic happened, and we could light those up within minutes. But the key thing is making sure you bake in resilience across every one of your components and don't rely on some of the core services that reside only in one region in Amazon.
And I think to top that, one of the things that we found, as I mentioned in my talk, is that this is live sport. It's not paying your taxes. And I know bank accounts were frozen for a little while, but not being able to get access to your bank account for a short while and then being able to get access to it. Sport in Italy is bigger than politics. If we screw up in Italy, it'll be spoken about in the parliament. That's how important it is. So I guess one of my answers is that it depends on the service that you're providing. Snapchat went down. I'm sorry, but I don't know many companies that are using Snapchat as their Slack channel, for example. Slack didn't go down, although there was some effect.
It's a bit of a wobble.
There was a bit of a wobble on it. Therefore, you need to build in resilience even with that. So I guess when it comes to it, it's the live services that we were running, which we believe there's no rehearsal, so you can't afford to take any risks with it, and you have to build in that level of resiliency. That's why I asked the question is, if we had our services running on Azure, Google, and AWS, that would be a huge cost for the customer to build in that kind of resilience. And we've just taken the view that we don't believe that you need to just because they're different cloud providers.
That's very interesting. You know, especially when you look at the enterprise markets, because question 11 was, and I'll read it out, currently there is little choice in terms of cloud providers supporting media streaming. When will we become cloud agnostic? Will we become cloud agnostic soon? And if so, what are the challenges cloud providers need to concentrate on to displace the incumbent provider? And I'm not asking that to stir things up, but for a healthy
incumbent provider being AWS.
Well,
people ask me all the time, why did you work with Google? Why did you work with this? What is Azure in the media business or out? Because they were out, and then they were in, then they came back out, and then they came back in. And I've heard rumours now that they're thinking of going on, and that's it. They want to sell 365 licenses.
Yeah.
Google has other objectives. And I go back and say, well, yeah, we chose Amazon because 10 years ago when Amazon invested in buying Elemental, they were the only organization building cloud compute that paid M&E any attention. That's not that we then go and pay homage to them because they were nice and kind to our industry. They were the ones who made it all happen, all the glue happen, as well as the services in one place. Things are changing, though. You can now use Azure and Google and Alibaba and Oracle or Akamai as the cloud platform and use other people's encoders and other people's packagers. That's coming.
Yeah.
So it will come. It's only a matter of time.
I think there are certain areas that are developing, media asset management, you know, and so forth. But having stirred that pot, we'll keep it neutral now. On advertising, you know, most of the streaming advertising models, I was thinking particularly, most of the streaming advertising models are aligned for, you know, sort of what we typically experience for targeted advertising for linear. Do you think they're going to evolve in a different way for streaming? You know, more targeting, different technologies, more akin to sort of broadband? What do you think?
Definitely, and I think if we think about a way where sports organizations can look at further monetization, virtual advertising lends itself quite well to that. And then you can sell in, you know, bring the broadcasters on board and get them, give them perhaps, you know, a piece of the pie for regionalization of that advertising, which obviously this wasn't possible 10 years ago, 15 years ago when the only distribution method was satellite. But if we move to a world where streaming is more prevalent and it becomes the primary means of distribution, and therefore multiple feeds can be created for a specific, you know, for a specific tournament like the Club World Cup or any other event, then you can offer and you can monetize that through different brands, or even allow your broadcasters to regionalize it with a sponsor that's more suitable for their market.
And I'll add to that in that one of the things that I can't, is it with the Japanese? I can't remember where it was, but one of the workflows is we'll get it to Spock in New Zealand, I think they are, and Spock do the multi-language commentary. I was at Sportel this week and I met a lady from, and I read her badge, Cam AI, and I thought, oh my goodness, Cambridge Analytica have had a revival here, but it's not. It's Cam AI, and they go one step further than what Spock use real-life commentators as a cheap way of doing multi-language versioning. Cam AI will use both real-life voices to do AI-based commentary. They pay the actors. The actors get a cut. The actors only have to give their voice, and that's it. They never see it again. So they could be on a French-Moroccan version of the event that's being broadcast. And I think where that also talks to something you and I spoke about earlier is that when you're doing extra versions, which weren't easily possible before, they weren't commercially viable before, that's where you can start getting different kinds of advertisers who want to speak to those markets in those languages, where they can now even make the advertisement in that language, either written or in voiceover, much, much more cost effectively. And that's where I think it'll start to change. Like I said, tech makes things cheaper, therefore we use it more.
Yeah. Do you think GDPR is going to have an effect on that kind of visibility? Because a lot of people talk about this, but whenever people look at it in anger, say, you know, sort of a championship club who's looking to sort of make their content available, one of the big things is the GDPR issues about exposing sort of service provider information back in terms of client lists and things like that. there are some issues there that have to be resolved to actually try and increase the revenue. You know, do you see it easing, or that still being a major challenge?
Absolutely, I hadn't given that thought, to be honest.
Okay.
I mean, AIB have got a bunch of frameworks that kind of describes, you know, what you can do with personal identifiable information, and you know they've got guidelines set out with the various different, you know, ad sales platforms, you know, the digital sales platforms and the sell side platforms. You know, there are very, very strict guidelines on what you can do with PII and how you can track user journeys, etc., and how you need to abstract user journeys. I think there's still a lot of way to go with, you know, protecting users' privacy and protecting, you know, the map of the user journey that the user goes through in order to either get to your content or where they go from your content elsewhere around other services around the internet. It's very easy to track and trace people, even if you're following all of the IAB guidelines. It's very easy for the marketers to be able to track exactly where you're visiting and what you're seeing. And obviously to then hone down where they want to monetize you. I think there's a long way to go.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else got any comments or questions? Go for it.
Possibly follow up from my earlier question, going back to the technology. I'm very interested in all this business of remote production. I always have problems with latency. It's interesting, you know, if you're listening to something online and also on the television, it's 20 seconds later or whatever. Obviously, latency isn't going to be a problem downstream, but if you are remotely producing, particularly if you're remotely producing in a different country, do you have problems with latency, and are there ways around that?
Absolutely, there's issues with latency, which I think, again, if we think back to COVID and what we're all trying to put together during COVID, things have come a huge way, both in terms of the type of connectivity that we can source, and if you think about the methods of compression, they've come a very, very long way. If before H.264 and AVC was sort of the standard format, you now and obviously come a long way in terms of standardization. We now, with J2K and JPEG-XS coming into play, we can get feeds around the world very, very quickly. So, yes, it's definitely an issue. With careful planning, it's becoming much better, and obviously that's something we do here at Stokely Park day in and day out, particularly, you know, at Singularity, we work with IMG on the DP World Tour and are able to remotely produce events that are taking place on the other side of the world with a sub-half a second latency. I would say there's still a long way to go, but we're definitely making strides.
I'd say lip sync's a real problem in that area, particularly for premium events, if you're looking at it. And some of it's actually a production problem, and some of it's actually a player problem, where players don't have the same capability that a set-top box has for aligning, you know, sort of in terms of time stamping. So some of it's baked in, some of it does need better production.
Just like to say that players do know how about timestamps. It's just that many people don't actually implement them correctly in their playback engine. So you can get very, very high accuracy synchronization, but in a lot of cases, folks just don't engineer that, which is really frustrating.
That's a fair correction, yeah.
And as the production gets more and more complex, there's a lot of other metadata, as well as the audio, as well as the video. And I've noticed, well, I know this came up as a question from a motorsport some time ago, that the timing data is way ahead of the video. And the audio and the commentary, I noticed the other day watching that the commentator mentioned the fact that a wheel didn't come off before I saw it.
Yeah.
So it's not just lip sync, it's a whole layers of metadata that needs timing. And it's a really difficult issue.
It's a difficult issue, and it is difficult to get right, but it can be done. You know, pretty much all of these systems emit a time code of some form or another. It just takes quite a bit of engineering effort to make sure that in your playback systems and in your metadata systems, you're actually syncing to that and only displaying or only playing back certain fragments at the right point in time. It's a difficult problem to solve, but it is something it is possible to solve.
I've got a slightly different take on it. I'm not convinced that it's the timing that Rory McIlroy hits the ball off the tee that's the issue. It's the timing, it's the time at which I see it that's the issue. Yeah, that sounds clear, doesn't it? But actually, if all the Spaniards are seeing it at the same time, where's the problem? The problem is that they're not. They're seeing it at different times depending on the transmission that they're getting. But which direction that's going? Is that going? Are we going to have terrestrial transmitters in 2030 or 2035? Tim Davies already spoken about it. You know, how much does it cost to run the terrestrial network in a country? It costs between 600 and $1 billion. And I tell you, the TV networks are not going to fund that, and neither is the government. If the viewership is, crashing down to 500,000 people in the country, and Mrs. Moriarty in the west of Scotland or Northern Ireland is the only person, it's cheaper to get them the stream via a Starlink or somewhere else than it is to service those networks. In 10 years' time, 5 to 10 years' time, I don't think this is going to be a discussion point.
I think, that's one of the questions,
Did I think another question?
No, I didn't say that because you were privy to it, and it's just as much your gig, so that's why you're sitting over there and I'm sitting here. But I mean, I think generally sports coverage is currently fragmented across many different platforms. Do you see moves to improve profitability? Because that's what we're talking about here. And if so, how will the change affect current streaming ecosystems? Because it's got to change. You know, at the moment, people are trying out a lot of things. I was actually looking at quite a few streaming providers, looking at the background to Netflix and Spotify, and when they actually became profitable. You know, I mean, if you look at, there's a clear tie-up between people who've got experience in an area and evolve into offering a streaming operation and being able to more quickly achieve profitability than people who start from ground zero and go into that market. But I mean, what do you know, clearly profitability's got to improve. But James, what do you think? You can even answer that in a technical way.
Unfortunately, it's the only way I can answer it. So there have been some very spicy discussions where people have basically said, keep it simple. So they've not stretched for the finessing of the standards. They've not been, dare I say, snobbish about the adoption of relatively accessible and simplistic forms of encoding. And actually, because, for example, I'm sure some of those cases were esports, they don't have the sort of baggage of doing it the way we've always done it. And I think it's fair to say that some people have shown in a disruptive way that it can be set up quickly. It doesn't have to be as expensive.
Yeah. I would actually say that adopting 1080p and accepting that interlace is a legacy standard and orientating things would help a lot. And I mean, that's to your comment that a lot of terrestrial and satellite networks are, you know, sort of slated to be retired. That, you know, I think we do have to have a rationalisation of workflows and a simplification, because at the moment we're making things difficult for ourselves. And I don't just mean progressive and interlace. I actually think, you know, sort of the UHD, HDR thing versus 1080p, you know, comes into play there.
Let's not mention NTSC and 5994. The bane of my existence.
Showing your age there.
Or CCAM?
Oh, well, sadly, you know, we've got customers all around the world. So, you know, we have to deal with non-integer frame rates, and it is something that is a continual pain in the butt.
I think over time, baggage... Sorry, were you going to... I think over time, baggage is going to get dropped.
Yeah.
And that will affect things. But I think if you're talking about profitability, what, for new entrants or for existing incumbents in general? Well, there's always going to be a challenge. Everybody thought that paper was going to go when digital came in. It didn't. There's more paper on our shelves than ever before. There's more people watching content than ever before in our world, and the population is only growing, and the access to that population is only growing. But I think for incumbents to become who are not profitable because the streamers are eating their lunch or their dinner or taking over their house, those incumbents need to take a look at some other markets and maybe start doing things afresh. If you look at the banking market, Starling came in, Revolut came in, Monzo came in, the challenger banks, we call them. NatWest have done something rather smart. They realised that they couldn't actually challenge the challenger banks by doing what they were doing. So they set up a challenger bank of their own called Metal. And I think that's an example of where sometimes you've got to leave down the bags over there, major European or international, national broadcasters, let's say, where they have all that heavy metal and they need to compete with the streamers. Sometimes they've got to go over here and start something completely new.
Well, we see that happening in the US, particularly more recently, with some of the large telco broadcasters in the US divesting their legacy cable networks and their legacy broadcast, what they call the legacy broadcast networks, and then focusing on the IP only side and the streaming side. I think that's going to become more common around the world now.
Well, if you look at the newer generation of viewers, they will consume more content via mobile devices than necessarily linear, and you can reach the next generation of viewers, as opposed to, obviously from a linear perspective, the barrier to entry and to be able to afford, just look at the UK, the cost of a subscription to a linear sports package is much higher than the cost to a subscription to Amazon Prime.
Yeah.
Therefore, or Netflix. Yeah. Therefore, it makes sense for federations and sports associations to start selling their rights into non-linear players to be able to get the next generation of viewers.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess one of the difficult thing for a consumer is that go back like 15 years ago, you'd either subscribe to a Virgin or to a Sky, or you'd go for terrestrial TV. Sorry, or you go for terrestrial TV, and that was your channel choice. Now you get to do all of that, and you go pay for Netflix, and you go and pay for Amazon Prime, and you go and pay for DAZN, and you go and pay for X, Y, and Z streaming service. So actually, for a consumer, where you may be concentrating on maybe £70 or £80 a month as it was a few years ago to get most of the channels together in one bundle. Now you're paying like £160, £170 a month to get all of this other content from like 5 or 6 different providers, and it's actually becoming very difficult for people to navigate all of that content to find the things they want to get. It's worse if you're a sports fan, because you then have to subscribe to 5 different properties and pay quite a massive amount of money to actually watch all of your teams and all of the organisations you want to follow. It's quite frustrating as a consumer.
Yeah. Anybody else a question? I'll nip in. Come on, somebody, the audience has got to have the last word. But I'll nip in with one question here. How does the industry deal with rights erosion in a streaming environment? Does web crawling or blockchain techniques have a future in combating piracy? And I'll say why I think that, because there were blockchain techniques that were used to crawl the web to look for rights infringement. And I can't say which meeting I was in, but I was in a meeting where 3 investor-backed technology companies were pursuing this, and they all couldn't make it work with blockchain to look on the web to actually look for rights infringement. It seems an obvious thing to do, but it's clearly very difficult, but it's clearly got huge monetary value to actually preserve rights.
It does. I'll let you come in on a technical side, because I can see you're chomping at the bit. There's 2 ways to address this. One is the technical way. The other is to make sure it doesn't happen. If you price things, or if you're not in the market, you're going to get piracy. Look what's going on in Belgium at the moment.
Yeah.
Proximus and the other crowd said no to the rights. Then it went to DAZN, and then they wouldn't buy the rights from DAZN. And then effectively the football isn't being broadcast in Belgium. So what's happening? All the pirates are streaming it into Belgium, and the people are lapping it up, and they're paying it, and the pirates are lapping it up. So there's a financial situation here, or there's a commercial missing the point in Belgium, and it's got the potential to happen in France as well with the mess up there. So if you commercially mess up a market, it's like grey importing. If the only reason grey importing works is because the price here is too low, the price there is too high. If you get the prices into some balance, you take away the desire for somebody to want to go and get it from somewhere else. So that's the commercial solution to it. But Andy?
I was going to say, pricing right is actually the best way to defeat piracy.
Yeah.
It's making the content as accessible as you can in all the markets you can, so that people don't need to pirate it. It's the simplest way of doing this, but it's a really hard business decision to actually price your content low enough to make it accessible, and so you're not going to encourage the pirates to get people to go and pirate from other services. But I think from a technical standpoint, relying on things like blockchain to defeat piracy, don't know how that would really work, but having to crawl the web for loads of different pirate sites, having to infiltrate pirate sites and pirate organizations is a really difficult thing. I worked previously with an organization that specialized in this, and they've got some really interesting tech that they use to do this. But doing simple things like fingerprinting your content as early in the chain as possible, and making sure that fingerprint can be used as part of your content recovery process to identify sources or identify your leaks, and then doing heavy lift on that to extract things like forensic watermarks to then identify the origin of that leak and the subscriber who leaked that content, are two critical things you need to do. It's as soon as you get content from the camera, fingerprint it there, and ideally you want to forensically watermark it. At the point where you deliver that content out to your end users at your CDN edge, you also want to embed another watermark there, so you can actually do a per session or per user identifier that's embedded in the video stream, and ideally imperceptible, and something that's not going to get destroyed by another 5 or 6 different transcoding generations. It's a difficult maths problem to do this, but it does work, and it is effective against piracy.
Okay. Anyone else? Any questions on that? Or any lateral question? Come on, you've got to have at least one question.
Score's even now, isn't it?
It is even. There you go.
We kind of touched on it a little bit during the conversation, but I feel that we've omitted discussing security and risk and where that responsibility lies. And also, what are we thinking about in terms of quantum compute, in terms of threats and, mitigating those potential threats?
Well, I think that sort of fine cuts one of the questions that we talked about before. And I think that we were able to skirt around the difficult security issues that were with one incumbent by saying we've got a good enough crystal ball to look at what's happening. But I think it's a very real problem at the moment. And I mean, I think that broadening your question up a little bit, that you don't get something for nothing. Remote production workflows do introduce a lot of vulnerabilities, and a lot of the human intervention or disgruntled employee type compromising of networks is an area that I think sort of this security really needs to be tightened, because there are definitely weaknesses in networks that it's impossible in a streamed and broadband environment to have the walled garden approach that the terrestrial broadcasters have. So I suppose that's a good question for the panel. How close can you get in terms of protecting content to match sort of the linear DTH and satellite providers in a broadband environment, because you do have a leaky cauldron at the moment.
So there was an episode getting on for 10 years ago. It's probably 2018. France 24 was hijacked by ISIS, took over the station and broadcast the flag and that. And there was a massive, massive investigation into that. Took a year and a half and something like €3 million for them to find out what the problem was. They found it out. There was an interview broadcast in France, and as is traditional, you've got the newsroom in the background, and the interviewee is in front of the newsroom, and the camera's pointing vaguely into the background. And there was a moment where the camera went out of focus on the interviewee and into focus on the newsroom. And there was a journalist whose screen had post-its all the way around the screen of all their different passwords. All they had to do then was to find the network. That was the easy bit. So to your point, Ian, the security isn't necessarily on the remote network, it's the human.
Yeah.
And that's a genuine case, which everybody was terrified about. If ISIS can take over France 24, that's it. Forget cloud computing, forget cloud broadcasting. It's just it's a network which is supposed to be entirely separate to their admin. The broadcasters were very critical at that at the beginning when they were bringing in IP facilities, that it's entirely separate from the rest of the business, and they still get into it. So technically, there are ways. I'm going to let others speak to it. The technical people.
You know, I have to sort of sit here and feel uncomfortable as an engineer because there's no two ways about it. When you look at the history, engineers love solving the problem in hand, and it's taken decades to sober up and realise that there are nefarious bad actors out there, and actually everything we do has had to be retrofitted, in effect, with security that allows some kind of stability. And it's probably, naming no names, it's probably an unfortunate truth that there are some very high-profile standards that are seeing the light of day and widespread adoption that didn't really have a comprehensive view of security when they were in development, and argue that it's being retroactively reinforced. So hopefully we're finally getting there, as TAMS is something still very much developmental. It's not hit the ground in terms of actual deployment yet, but I know full well that those guys are absolutely grappling with and ensuring that those security aspects are going to be there from day one.
Okay. Anyone else? Any final thoughts on that?
I was going to say something really interesting about working in anti-piracy briefly is a lot of broadcasters rely on satellite distribution for their broadcast feeds, and there's a very well-known broadcaster in Qatar that was basically getting their TV channels hijacked, and the football rights that they'd bought were basically being streamed out to another Middle Eastern territory. It was state-sponsored piracy through leaking of BIS keys. Just through the investigations, actually, if you get involved in some of the anti-piracy investigations, you quickly learn that actually there are loads of forums where BIS keys for common terrestrial broadcast are widely exchanged. None of the BIS keys for pretty much any UK terrestrial distribution are secure. They all leak within minutes of a broadcast taking place. They can be reverse engineered trivially with computers available these days.
Okay.
The best thing you can do is try and secure each component of your architecture as much as you can, but you can always guarantee things will leak eventually. There is always a hole somewhere in your defences that will leak.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'd like to thank the panel. I mean, I think Ciarán came up with the most important point this evening. Don't allow post-it notes in the stationery cupboard. But I think it's been a great panel. I'd like to thank everybody at IMG who's put it all together. Certainly open to further suggestions of topics that you'd like to see. We will move down the ecosystem and explore other areas, but it's good night from us, but the food will be available for the next half hour, but the cloud session closes at 9:30 sharp. But thank you very much.
Thank you.